and welcome to a new episode of Startuprad.io, your podcast show with startup news and interviews from Germany.
Hey folks, this is Jörn from Startuprad.io. A podcast like this is not possible without sponsors. Therefore, we appreciate the support of Slack. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Slack. Millions of people in hundreds of thousands of companies rely on Slack to get their work done. For them, Slack is where all the people and the tools they need to work together are gathered, where ideas form, evolve, and reach fruition, where plans are proposed, documents exchanged, expenses approved, travels booked, and deals signed, where decisions are made and consensus is reached, where the humdrum becomes the easily done. Slack, where work happens. Find out why at slack.com.
Hey folks, this is Startuprad.io, your number one startup podcast from Germany in English. I'm recording this live and direct from lovely Frankfurt at the time of the International Automobile Exhibition, also called the Frankfurt Motor Show. It's the 15th of September and I do have Patrick here as a guest. Hey, welcome.
Hello, good afternoon from sunny Amsterdam.
Well, admittedly, we just had thunderstorm with hail here in Frankfurt for like 10 minutes, and now the sun is coming out as well again. So I had to take down the blinds. Many people would not know the person, Patrick. Therefore, we should just tell you are the co-founder and executive of the Startup Bootcamp, right?
Correct. I'm co-founder of Startupbootcamp, which is one of the largest global startup accelerator programs around the globe at this moment. We operate this year 21 programs in, I think, 17 different cities on 5 continents. So almost all major cities in Europe, including Berlin, London, Amsterdam, Barcelona, Istanbul, but also in New York, Miami, Chengdu, Shanghai, Mumbai. So we're truly a global company. Yeah, that's where we've got a portfolio now of around 550 startups that we have invested in and that we help to grow internationally and scale up quite fast. This is one of the companies that I'm the co-founder of and the CEO of. Then we have 2 other companies. One is called InnoLeaps. This is a company that helps really large companies like Unilever, Heineken, large banks with digital transformation. So really understanding the mind, skill, and tool sets that they need, basically the mind, skill, and tool sets that startups mostly have to basically accelerate their innovation processes. So this is company is called InnoLeaps, works only for really large companies. And then thirdly, we have a company that's called the Talent Institute, where we basically help unemployed students with a university degree to get the skills and the tool sets that is needed to work at a fast-growing startup. So basically, we have 3 accelerators, one for startups, one for corporates, and one for talent. And obviously there's tons of synergies between the 3.
I just had to smile when you've been talking about innovating in very big companies, because I've once heard a rule of thumb. If a company has 3,500 employees and more, they're just basically busy with themselves and don't care too much about the world outside, which also, of course, is a big stopper to innovation. Would you kind of agree to that?
Well, what you see is that innovation obviously is going faster and faster. You know, most thresholds to either start a startup or to innovate even within a large company have gone down. The costs have gone down. Basically, the methodologies that are out there help you to innovate faster, but it also means that competition is increasing really fast. And what we see, the biggest difference, I would say, between startup founders and large corporations is that if a startup doesn't figure out if the problem that it is trying to solve is a serious problem for its potential customers, that startup will fail. So if the founders are not very close to a real problem out there in the market, and having validated that problem with hundreds, if not thousands of potential customers, if it has not validated that and is not solving a real problem, then it will fail. What you see with a lot of large companies is that they think they know what their customers really need, but in most of the cases, they actually don't. They innovate from within, from ideas or new business opportunities that they think they see on either a board level or within the company. and then work on new solutions, new business model, new products, and launch them, and then find out that there might not be a problem that they're actually solving. So what you see in a lot of large companies is that they have come very far away from the actual end users. And this makes innovation really hard because, again, if you don't solve a real problem for your end users, being it in a B2B or a B2C environment, there will be no interest from those end users. That means that there is no business model. And I think this is one of the major differences that I see with high potential startups and with corporates is that high potential startups, if they know what they're doing right, then they will validate all the assumptions that they have. While at corporates, they think they're so aware of where the market is going, what the customer needs are, and they don't validate their assumptions. And this is a huge difference. Obviously, startup founders have the entrepreneurial mindset, the can-do mindset. They're small, they're agile, they can move fast. Within large companies, this is obviously a challenge. The culture is often being risk-averse. If you take risks and things fail, then people might be punished or even fired fast. While we say if you fail, obviously it's not a goal by itself to fail, but that failure will bring you learnings, and the learnings will bring you further. So the whole culture of being entrepreneurial is something that you also see within large corporations, is something that is completely different than within the startup world, which eventually is all about leadership and how the CEO encourages innovation, risk-taking, agile way of working, thinking. So there's quite a few differences, but I would say the major differences are on the cultural side and the way that startups innovate compared to how corporates used to innovate, where corporates also often innovate in a waterfall model, using a waterfall step-by-step model, so gateway process model, while startups do this more on a lean way, an iterative way of innovation, where basically they take small steps, bring an MVP to the market, get data back, validate and adjust. So it's just different processes. It's different kind of beasts, actually, a small startup and a large corporation.
Very fascinating observations, and they do very much match with what I see as a consultant and also as a podcaster, talking to lots and lots of startups. Talking about that, we may tell the people that this interview came to be as a part of a cooperation that we have. We're usually your media partner for the Startup Bootcamp Fast Track fintech here in Frankfurt, and we help to promote it. And also from time to time, we do recommend startups for this. And mental high five, we had Get Penta in your last batch at Startup Bootcamp Fintech here in London. So just to make sure all the listeners are aware of the situation.
Very good. No, you've been very supportive, and thanks for that. We leverage always ecosystems that are locally on the ground, where we do our fast tracks, which is basically our scouting for high potential startups in Frankfurt or in Berlin or in Barcelona. And another thing I might already want to share is that, and I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but we're currently seriously investigating setting up one of our fintech programs also in Frankfurt, basically. So hopefully next year around this time we will be on the ground in Frankfurt with one of our programs.
Sure, we should talk about that as well later off topic. But before we get to all of this, maybe we should tell the listeners where you're actually coming from, because I was actually surprised. I looked at your profile in LinkedIn before we start this interview, and I discovered you have been a professional snowboarder at one point in time. So can you tell our listeners who are out there, who are aspiring entrepreneurs or even maybe students and thinking about doing a startup, how you came to a startup? Because if I remember it, even shortly before the dot-com bubble, startups was not a thing. There was basically no option for you, no way for you here in Germany to do a startup. How did you get into startups, and how did Startup Bootcamp became to be? That would be very interesting for me.
Yeah, so I've always been very entrepreneurial. I come from a very entrepreneurial family, and I actually started my first, let's say, really small businesses in those days when I was 15. And that was because my parents always took me skiing from when I was a little kid until I was able to pay for it myself. And I was also a very active surfer in my early days. And when I was 13, 14, I'm now 49, so that's quite some time ago, I read an article in a surf magazine about surfing on snow, which eventually became snowboarding. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. If I can use the skills that I have in surfing and the passion that I have for surfing also on the slopes in the snow. So, and then I tried to find out, can you actually buy snowboards here in Europe or in the Netherlands? And you couldn't do that. So I started together with a friend when we were 15, our first little snowboard factory. His dad had a wood factory. So we started producing our own snowboards. The first ones, and they broke, and then another. And well, eventually this evolved. And eventually we didn't make a huge business out of this, to be honest. But it was my first learning curve as an entrepreneur. Also just doing things, not thinking about it. But if you feel good about things and you're passionate about it, you can normally push them through and you hustle it around. And this is what we did. And then when I was 17, snowboarding became a little bit more popular. I was approached by some sponsors from Europe and from the US. And I started competing in snowboarding. And then I learned that combining sports with entrepreneurship and doing business was actually something that was really fascinating. So I closed my first sponsor deals, and I did some TV commercials with Philips around the globe, and we made some movies. And this evolved until I was around 21. At the same time, I finished my university studies. And then after that studies, it was the question for myself, do I stay in this sports business where I, by that time, had some own brands that were doing training camps for semi-professional snowboarders and kids. We launched some fashion products. I was sponsored by large companies like Oakley and stuff like that. So the question was, do I stay in this really fun environment of fun sports and try to make a business of that, or am I gonna do actually something with what I really studied, which was international business? And then I was lucky, I think, because that formed my career, that I was hired by, at that time, a decent TV production company, which is called Endemol. It's the company, it's now the largest TV production company in the world. And I got hired by the boards, who are, in my opinion, the two best entrepreneurs, I would say, in the last 30, 40 years, at least in the Netherlands and probably even in Europe. It's John de Mol and Joop van den Ende. And I operated with them for 7 years. And we grew the company from 2 countries to 36 in 7 years. And then we sold it to Telefonica in 2001, 3 months before the internet bubble exploded. And that's sort of like where I learned that timing is not unimportant. We sold the company for 150 times profits for 5.3 billion, which is a huge amount for a TV production company. And after that, I started basically doing my own startups. I started doing investments in technology companies. And I did that from 2001 till 2009, early 2010. And then I learned a lot in those years investing in companies. I also did another startup myself, which we scaled up to 15 countries in 3.5 years. It was in the gaming environment, online gaming. And then I thought in 2010, early 2010, I thought it's time to give back everything that I learned as an entrepreneur in the different businesses that I set up, in the IPOs that we did, in the companies that we sold. And I thought it was time to give back to the next generation of entrepreneurs. And basically, investing in startups is pretty risky. And some of the investments that I made, I was lucky. But most of them, they actually went down the drain. And I lost all the hard money that I basically earned. Luckily, not everything, but quite a substantial amount. And I thought maybe I should not invest by myself, but I should co-invest with people that have skills that I don't have. And then I went to the US and I heard for the first time about startup accelerators that just started about 2 years before, like Y Combinator and companies like Dropbox and Airbnb came out of that. I went to the US and I looked around for 6 months and I thought, well, this is what we need in Europe as well, and maybe even further than just Europe. But I said, I'm going to set up the first startup accelerator program basically outside of the US. And the guys in the US that I spoke to, they connected me with 2 Danish guys that were basically working on the same thing, which eventually became Startupbootcamp. So in 2010, we joined our co-founders in Startupbootcamp. So Startupbootcamp was founded by me and my Dutch business partner and 2 Danish guys, Alex Farset and Karsten Kolbeck. And there seemed to be a good culture fit and business click between the Danish and the Dutch. And we started Startupbootcamp basically 2010 and scaled up pretty fast in the last 7 years, which has been an amazing adventure. And then along the way, we launched, let's say, the corporate accelerator and also the talent acceleration side. So that's a little bit the story of my life. I'm very passionate about the things that I do. If I do them, I do them very focused and I give everything that I have. That's always what I did in sports as well. And what I actually learned, I would say, since we started doing Startup Bootcamp is that After my career as a snowboarder, I also trained teams, younger teams, let's say kids from 14 to 18 in snowboarding. And I really love that coaching, maybe even more than competing myself. And this is a little bit the same that I have now in running and being involved in the accelerator programs that we run across the globe, is that I love to work with startups. I love to work with people. If it's startups, corporates, or talent, I just love to give back my experience and help them and hopefully add some value so they will not make the same mistakes as I made. And I have plenty of mistakes that I made, but also leverage my knowledge and my network. And that's what I dedicated my life to, at least until today.
When I heard you've been an investor from 2002 to 2009, for everybody who has not been in business at this time, this was a time of a pretty bad downturn, busting of the dot-com bubble, and it basically went down for quite some time till it came up, I think, a few years. I don't know how your feeling was, but I do believe at least 2004, maybe 2005 was the dip, especially for startups, even longer. And I would be curious what you would recommend to the people out there when they feel like there's a dip coming, or if they're afraid of something like that. What would be a recommendation? What should they do? How should they make the business fit for a downturn?
Yeah. So there's two ways of looking at this. From an investor point of view, and from an entrepreneurial point of view, if you run your own company. Let's start with the first one, the investor point of view. I would say hold your horses. Don't get nervous. Although the market might collapse, that doesn't mean that the underlying value of the companies that you have invested in is actually collapsing. That's one thing. Secondly, it's normally best to invest when the market is going down, because the prices of the companies are normally cheaper. But obviously, it takes guts to invest when the market is down or even going down, because you don't know how much further it will go down. But if I learned one thing, what goes down does go up. And the other way around, it also works. What goes up also must come down. So I would say 50% of the successes that I had and also failures that I have, actually, I would say 100% of the failures that I had have to do with timing. Timing in business is one of the most crucial and I would say even underestimated factors in doing business and setting up companies.
And the very bad thing, you can never force the timing. So their forces, they just sweep over you. So you have to be at the right spot, but also at the right time, right?
Yeah. So the things where the initiatives that I took in setting up companies or companies that I invested in where I failed were companies that are actually too early in the market or too late in the market. And mostly too early in the market. For a startup, it's extremely difficult to create a market. But to start building on a small ripple, if you're talking in surfing terms, if there's no wave, you can paddle. If there's no ripple in the ocean, you can paddle as fast as you want and put as many efforts as you want, but you will never. The wave will never carry you. But if there's a little ripple, and the ripple starts growing, well, when the ripple starts and you feel that this could become a serious wave, then you should start pedaling. And that's the same thing with investing in startups or in any companies. There has to be a ripple, and then you can ride the wave. So, but if there's nothing there, and I invested in quite some companies, and I also launched quite a few companies that were just 3, 4, 5, sometimes maybe even only 1 year too early in the market. There was no demand yet in the market. If the wave is already going over, if it has its peak, then you should also not invest, because then it's determined to go down unless the company has found a new business model that could eventually become a new ripple. And that's what you actually want, because markets are changing so fast, companies are changing so fast. The average lifespan of every company has gone down from over 80 years to now less than 15 years. So that means that you have to watch out for the ripples and catch the waves at the right time. As a startup founder or as a owner of a business, obviously, when you feel that the market is going down, you should be aware of this, and you should really manage your cash flow extremely well. Because if the market goes down, that means eventually that your customers will either not put any new orders at what you're doing unless you have a product that they really, really need, or they will start negotiating with you about the price because they're under pressure, which means your margins are going down. So have a good look at your cost, at your operating cost, at your overhead, and manage your cash flow extremely well. Always make sure that you have at least for 12 months money in the bank so you have time to think. I think this is the problem when there's a crisis or when the market goes down. If you don't have enough time to think, you will not be able to come up with a plan. If you have ease of mind and you have 8 to 12 months to think because you have enough money in the bank, and if you're a great entrepreneur, you will be able to figure it out and you can turn things around. Either lower your cost or go into new markets or whatever. But what you see with many companies is that they just don't have enough liquidity. And if you only have for 1 or 2 months money in the bank, and the market goes down, then things become really stressful and then it's hard to think. So thinking and leveraging your intellectual brain capacity together with your co-founders and having the time to do that is the most crucial thing, I would say.
Yes, as they always say, cash is king, which also happened to, for example, let Lehman Brothers go bust because they just ran out of cash. They lended out all their money long term and they got financed, as you say, short term, like for a few weeks, for a few months. And then at one point, the markets froze up, their funding dried up, and they went belly up.
Yeah, that's it.
I would be very interested in, you've been talking about ripples and the waves overhead. It sounded like you have developed at least a gut feeling. Have you some additional hints, maybe a whole idea how entrepreneurs and investors can spot those ripples or those waves overhead, or is it just your gut feeling?
Well, that's a good question. If you look at, let's use an example that is currently quite fascinating, which is the whole cryptocurrency domain, right? I don't know if you guys put any of your investments or maybe savings into any digital currency like Bitcoin or Litecoin or Ethereum or Nemo. I mean, there's many cryptocurrencies out there, but this is something that obviously is going to influence many markets, not only the financial markets, but Ethereum and the whole blockchain will, in my opinion, disrupt many markets, from notaries to legal firms to financial firms to how do we do business. And I started looking at this new domain about 2 years ago, which was even for me pretty late because this trend started, 5-6 years ago on blockchain technology, on digital currencies, but it's been taking off now. And now it's got a tremendous amount of attention. Yeah, is this gut feeling? I think it's gut feeling, but it's also doing your research. I read a lot. This is one of the major tips that I give to all the startups that I work with and companies that I work with. Try to read at least one book every 2 weeks. Read blogs, there's so much you can learn. And all the content is today freely almost available on the internet. Books you still have to buy, I think, but there's so much information. And if you read things, you will sort of you're going to foresee where certain things are going to. It just makes you smarter. Reading makes you smart. And so I guess it's a combination of being passionate about it, doing your research, and having a sense of business. Where are things going? Yeah, and focus also. You cannot focus on everything. So, pick some markets that you're really interested in or some domains that you're interested in and dive deep in them. And before you know it, you will be an expert. When we started Startupbootcamp, let's be honest, I was an entrepreneur and I had a lot of entrepreneurial experience, but I invested in some startups, but I was not an expert in startups. Eventually, I said, I'm going to dedicate myself to helping startups succeed. And now I'm being positioned globally as one of the persons, and there's quite a few, but that is really seen as a thought leader in the startup domain and in the corporate innovation domain. So focusing and investing time in it, that's the best way to focus, to see where certain things are going.
I totally agree with you. I got a little story with that. You may know that we do regular news wrap-ups 10 times a year. And every time we do, going a little bit before that, we do share a lot on social media. That's how we got our listeners. That's how we got the people who follow us. And therefore, we also, especially I, do read a lot of blogs, posts, and all of this stuff. And I try to do a mix, like the best of the content that I'm reading plus news is what I put out there. And in our news sections, we always have a part called Stay Ahead of the Curve, where there's stuff that I personally think is very interesting. It's always a lot, but I do feel it makes you smarter. And some people say, come, forget it. Nobody reads that. Nobody clicks on that. But actually, when you see there are a few thousand people who are listening to the news every time, and let's say 1% of 1% just clicks through all the links, but I totally believe that are those people who actually succeed in the end because they actually do their homework.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Going now a little bit into Startup Bootcamp, just between you and me and a few thousand listeners of this podcast, can you tell us what's the secret sauce of Startup Bootcamp?
The secret sauce? Well, with every company, the secret sauce is not that secret. It's the people. It is with every company that you build, you need to make sure that you hire people that are actually better than yourself. So if I would talk about the secret sauce, it is the people that together with me on a daily basis work on helping early stage companies succeed. Because if you can have a format and a concept, and we have all of that. We have a real in-depth process on how we help accelerate these companies, how we help to grow them fast. We have all kind of ways to make sure that these startups don't go bankrupt, that the founders don't get issues with each other, that we have thousands of mentors that can help accelerate. We have the top 100 partners on board, corporate partners from the Deutsche Banks of this world to the Daimler-Benzes and the ING banks and the Googles and the Intels and the IBMs. They're all partners with us. But that would only be possible if you have the right people. And this is something that is highly underestimated, I would say, with startup founders, but also in corporate environments. If you talk about innovation, is that it's not about new ideas. When you have a new startup, it's not about the idea of the concept. It's only about the people. It is about the founding team. Within a corporate, it's the team that works on the innovation. It's not about the ideas. It's about execution. And that is highly underestimated. From a shitty idea, but with a great team, can still be a great company because they will pivot. A shitty team with a great idea will always fail. So that's the secret sauce. It's the people. But I think in any company, every company, it's always about the people.
I couldn't agree more with that. Can you tell us a little bit? I would be personally curious, not in detail what Startup Bootcamp does, but I would be curious about the process. How do you decide in which city, what kind of startup bootcamp you set up? It's like you're like they're one of the major trendsetters, trendspotters there is. Therefore, I would be very interested how you actually do it. And also it's a big applause, a big appreciation of Frankfurt that you're thinking about that. And I would be curious how you came to this decision.
Well, that's actually quite simple. We always look at what kind of industry are active in a certain city. And let's give the example of Frankfurt. It's my assumption that eventually the whole financial system will be moving to Frankfurt. London is losing there. So before we had our fintech programs in London, we didn't have a program in Frankfurt yet. We have one in Amsterdam. And obviously we're doing this in Amsterdam and not in Eindhoven because the whole financial system here in the Netherlands is being run from Amsterdam. And the whole financial system in Germany is being run from Frankfurt. All the major players are there. And now it's going to be even more dominating because Frankfurt will be, in my opinion, the financial ecosystem and hub for large fintech players, but also for startups. It will be Frankfurt. Let me give you another example. If you look at a program that we do, for example, based on e-commerce, we do that here in Amsterdam. All the commerce companies, all the major retailers, e-commerce companies, they're all based in Amsterdam. So we do it there. So we look very closely at what kind of companies are already there. Is there an ecosystem of talent, of corporate partners, of investors in that ecosystem? And should we then bring that to the ecosystem? We're now currently also looking to launch a Startup Bootcamp program in the Ruhrgebiet area. Well, you can imagine we're not going to do a fintech program there or a food tech program there, but it's going to be more on the industrial side because obviously the Ruhrgebiet is an industrial environment. So you look at what is already there, what kind of startup activity there is. We have lots of data points about that. We look at the corporate partners that are there. We focus, by the way, heavily on what we call corporate startup engagement. It's called CSE, Corporate Startup Engagement. Many of the startups that we help accelerate are not in B2C, they're on B2B. And we do that because we see that B2C in Europe is quite complicated. You need a lot of marketing power to do that. So we focus heavily on B2B. So that means that we're looking for solutions where we can bring startups to potential corporate partners that are looking for these kind of solutions, either to be invested in, acquired in, cooperate with, do POCs with. So that's basically, we look at local ecosystems and then we say, hey, is there an accelerator already in this domain? No, there's not. Okay, let's go there.
Very fascinating approach. We may add, because about half of our listeners are from the United States. In the top 10, there's also Brazil and China. So we may explain that the Ruhrgebiet, which you completely properly pronounced, I'm very impressed, is also known as the Rhine-Ruhr area. And it's up there a little bit above Cologne, where's Duisburg, Essen, Düsseldorf, Cologne. You can all include them a little bit. It's a former area where they had a lot of steel and a lot of coal production. And It's one of the densest populated areas in Germany. If you add all the cities together, they're by far greater than, for example, Berlin. I would be just curious about one more thing that I would poke there on you, because we only have 5 minutes left. You squeezed us in your daily schedule. Thank you very much for this, because you did your startup bootcamp mobility in Berlin and not in Stuttgart. And Stuttgart, it's like the center of the biggest automotive machine building cluster in the world. Like there's Porsche there, there's not too far away Mercedes and all the big companies that actually deliver to it. First level, second level manufacturing companies. So why didn't you set up the Startup Bootcamp mobility there, but rather in Berlin?
Good question. Obviously, you're completely right. And I'm not saying, and maybe you're hinting there already a little bit, that we're not going to go with a mobility program into the core in more of the south of Germany, into the Frankfurt and Munich area. That would be quite obvious. One other thing, which obviously is the case in Germany, very different, I would say, from quite a few other, let's say, other cities, is that Berlin has an extremely strong startup ecosystem, which was at the time that we started the Smart Transportation and Energy program in Germany, was not the case in Stuttgart or Munich. There was very little activity there on startups. It was actually very centralized and still is, to be honest, in Berlin. We do, however, today see that Berlin I feel that it's losing a little bit of its power, which I think is okay, because in Germany is so big, all the Bundesländer there together, they should have an accelerator program in each of the cities and Bundesländer that are basically there, I think, because there's different dominations industry-wise. So for us, when we started this program, which was over 3 years ago, and we started actually fundraising over 4 or even 5 years ago, we thought that Berlin was, at least from a startup activity point of view, more attractive than being in the south of Germany. But to be honest, that has changed. So you never know what might happen.
So in the last few minutes you reserved for us, can you tell us just a tiny bit more what you could offer to corporates who also listen to this podcast with a startup bootcamp, with your innovation companies?
Yeah, we on the corporate side, we basically if we have corporate partners that partner up with Startup Bootcamp, basically we have a full package that we offer them, which includes, let's say, a mini MBA for what we call entrepreneurial residence, which means basically that a corporate partner like Daimler-Benz or Deutsche Bank can bring one of their top employees or two to us for 3 to 6 months, which we will educate them on how cooperation with startups works. How is it possible that these startups are able to innovate so fast? What methodologies do they actually use? So that's like a mini MBA on innovation, how startups works. They get a lot of exposure. We share with them all the business intelligence. So each year we see around 15 to 20,000 startups coming through our systems, which means that we can sort of like forecast where certain industries are going into: mobility, cybersecurity, fintech. And we share this business intelligence with our corporate partners. Next to this, we take them on our fast tracks. So they, together with us, go to Tel Aviv or to Frankfurt for a day or two. They meet the startups. They start talking to them, maybe exploring already if they can cooperate. So that's basically what we offer. We have a package of 10 different services that we offer to our corporate partners, which is very much focused on, again, CSE, helping these corporates work together with startups, helping startups work together with corporates. On the InnoLeap side, we actively work with the Unilevers, the Henkels of this world, the ING banks, the Rabobanks of this world, and we basically help them on a C-level to rethink how innovation works. What is their innovation strategy? How do they build a portfolio? How can they, with less investment, launch more new business models and have more impact, be more successful, new products and new business model innovations. And therefore, we basically take small teams from the corporate side out of the building, and we more or less accelerate them with a format that is like 50% the same as we do with Startup Bootcamp, but 50% is really different because corporates just operate differently. And we take them literally out of the building and in settings of 3 to 4 corporate teams with 3 or 4 people on each team on the corporate side and around 30 to 40 people on our side, we help to accelerate and validate the new business propositions that these corporates want to launch. So instead of launching a new innovation for 50 million or 30 million where they work on for a year or more, we do this with a few €100,000. So we actually increased our innovation portfolio and increased the return on investment on new innovations. And I have plenty of examples of that. If you would like to talk about that next time, or maybe even connect you to the CEO of InnoLeaps, who is my business partner, on how we've done this for companies like Unilever and for Philips and for Vodafone, many large corporates, and the impact that we made there. So if there's any interest, please just drop me an email on pdz@startupbootcamp.org. That's pdz@startupbootcamp.org. And I will make sure that either I get in touch or one of my business partners will get in touch.
Great. Thank you very much for your time. It was completely pleasure. We'll have your email and the respective links in the show notes of this. And if you're listening to this interview on either Facebook, YouTube, or another channel, go to www.startuprad.io and you will surely find the interview and all the show notes included to it. Just my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks for taking the time, gentlemen. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.